The Apple Vision Pro is finally here. And with that comes a bunch of questions. If you're a designer today, how can you get started with designing for the Vision Pro? How do you understand the principles of spatial UX design as well as learn from the people who've been designing for AR and VR? If you're somebody who's interested in this new tech movement happening and want to be a part of that movement, eventually designing apps for the Vision Pro, how can you get started today? What is the base fundamentals that you need to learn as part of your learning? Hi, my name is Abhinav, and in this video, we've compiled a list of 69 resources, just a coincidence. And we've categorized them into a couple of categories. Basics for those who want a quick overview in just 10 minutes. Intermediate for those who want to spend the next couple of weeks going deeper and learning more about this. And advanced for those who want to go off the deep end, commit to this, and become spatial UX designers in the years to come. So let's jump into it. So starting out, we all know what happened last week, WWDC 2023. Now, the ultimate basics is you want to start here. You want to watch the whole keynote. Now, I know the first half of the keynote is related to iOS 17. Second half is Vision Pro. So up to you whether you watch the whole thing or just that half, but definitely watch this. Second, once you've done this, check out our design details stream. Because in this was a 2-hour stream where we reviewed all of WWDC with screenshots that I took, 170 screenshots of the design details. Now, again, half of this video is dedicated to iOS 17. The other half is Vision Pro, right? So whether you want to watch the whole thing or half of it, up to you. But that's the very basic, right? Basic where you want to get started. It's this. Start here, then watch this. All right. Once you have done that, it's now time to jump into Apple's official resources that they dropped as part of WWDC. It starts with principles of spatial design, developing an understanding of what is this space that we operate in. Once you understand that space, right, at a top level view, what are spatial user interfaces? How does input happen? And we have something here about accessibility as well. This is a brand new medium, right? So people are very, very unfamiliar with this new medium. So how do we create something that's accessible? Definitely watch this, right? Beyond that, here are 2 Figma resources as well. Now, this is Apple's first time that they're releasing an official resource for Figma. Before this, they would do, I think, Sketch, Photoshop, and I think Adobe got in there and convinced them to do XD. So they used to do XD as well. But here's Figma's official iOS resources, not really related to spatial, but as you can see, the UI is still 2D for the most part, right? So I would definitely suggest checking this as well as this. This is an unofficial file, this Vision Pro UI kit, but this is the most popular one. This is the one that was most saved. So that is where you want to get started. But these videos, right? What exactly do they contain? Right? Do you really have to watch these videos? Can I give you a top level overview? Yes, absolutely I can. The recommendation I have for you, there's this article by Anish. Anish is an alumni of 10K Designers. He's also one of our mentors. He works as a user experience designer at EY. He's put together this summary of the keynote, right? So he's literally read it, taken screenshots, written his notes, and he's put this together from those Apple resources, right? So if you want a quick summary, you can definitely check this out. Beyond that, here's some screenshots, right? So this was our first view into what it exactly looks like. We did review these in the stream that we did, this one right here. But these are some more from the extended sessions that Apple did. This gives a really good view into it. In fact, some of this stuff, as I was looking at it, I was like, Apple should have probably dropped this in the main keynote. This is so good. So these screenshots, it shows you a little bit more how exactly do sizes work, right? Now, some of this is definitely customizable, but based on the context that you're designing for, I can totally see that you might want a slim one, you want a kind of square one, extended, panoramic, tall versus wide. What are the use cases for each? That's a little bit that was covered there. Field of view, which is typically how are people using it, right? So you're either sitting up front like this, in which case your eyesight, your line of sight is like this because it's in front of you, or it could be upwards. But then your field of view is pretty much what you see right immediately in front. There was a little bit about how shadows work, small scale versus large scale, what are the differences, how exactly you can imagine there's you, your application, and the environment. How exactly do you imagine that? And I think this was to do with sound, which is if you're designing, let's say, something like an onboarding experience, right? So it says hello on the table. Maybe after this, it sets up a workspace on the table. I don't know what app this is, but as part of onboarding, you can have sound come from different places in the room, right? It's not just sound as in on or off. It's sound, but from where, right? So there's that additional dimension of space that's been added. Definitely worth thinking about. But overall, folks, that's the basics, right? That's the basics. Now we're going to jump into a little bit more intermediate, and those I'm pretty sure very few have seen. So in the intermediate category, what is the difference, number one, between basic and intermediate? Basic is the timeline for something like this. The timeline for you to go through all of these things and learn it is probably a week. 1 week to really go through this, make some notes, develop an understanding, right? 1 week is what I would say is basics. Now, of course, you could do this over a weekend, right? But I'm just kind of setting a max limit. Going to intermediate would be 1 month plus, right? The kind of stuff here is way more in depth. It requires going back in time, right? So space and time, very interesting to think about these two dimensions, right? Because when we are getting into the intermediate resources, we also have to go back in time. We have to start exploring a little bit about the history of VR, because if we are committed to become spatial designers, we have to understand the field. We can't just say, I'm going to start at today's time, right? There is no guarantee that what we have today is all there is, right? There's a lot of work that designers and developers have been doing over the last decade that, is not suddenly irrelevant. The software we have today builds upon this huge repository. But let's jump into it. Starting off, I picked this one particular research paper. It's called Design and Evaluation of Spatial Interfaces in VR. The reason I picked this was it was an evaluation paper, right? So it contained a bunch of basic definitions of what exactly is the spectrum between real and virtual, right? It also talks about some of the early experiments with virtual and augmented reality, right? Going as far back as the 1960s. This is Ivan Sutherland's head-mounted display. It had miniature CRTs in this. We saw Apple, and Apple decided to make their headset light. You had that power bank, which was separate. This, in fact, was so heavy that this was actually mounted on the ceiling. So there was a huge, you can imagine just like a pole hanging like this, and then you appear here, put it on, and that was the first head-mounted display, right? So this paper talks about a little bit of that. It then talks about how it went from research to a few commercial applications, right? But it talks about what the limitations are. Now, the reason I think this is important for you to know is because when the headset comes out and when you're going to use it, you're going to be like, this is amazing, right? It's going to be a finished, polished product by Apple. But you have to understand that it was a very, very difficult slog to get here. Because really think about this. Think about you being the team working on this. It was released in 1995. It's been 30 years since then, right? Imagine how early these people were. It hurts to be earlier than your time. But definitely check this out because this will help you develop that understanding. Going a little further, I have another paper here. It's called Xargonomics, Facilitating the Creation of Ergonomic 3D Interfaces. Now, you did notice this one particular thing here, which was despite the fact that these are 3D spaces, these are still 2D interfaces, right? There is a little bit of depth. So things like shadows, overlay shadows, these highlight glows, but it's not a 3D interface, a full 3D interface. So anyway, this particular paper, what it talks about is a little bit about the ergonomics of this design, right? So this diagram that you see here, it's this little guy and he's moving like this, right? Why? Because you have to think about the movement of arms. It's not just fingers anymore. You have to think about the whole arm and your shoulders and stuff, right? So in this, they talk about this very particular concept called ergonomic cost, right? So every action has an ergonomic cost associated, which is how much do I have to move, right? I guess that's what they're talking about at a broad level. But that's something I will say, check it out. The third here is Meta apparently has something called Facebook IQ, which is, I guess, a team within Meta that does these research papers. And they, I think, interviewed a couple thousand people around this. This was June 2021, so not too old. But anyway, there's this huge PDF. It talks about today there is AR and VR, like these are the two kind of spaces. And it talks a little bit about what are the possibilities, what's the future that we're building, what are Facebook's initiatives around this. So check this out. I thought this was really nice. Again, before their time, right? Really before their time. So you will see a lot of stuff here. They're almost pitching it to you. They're pitching it to you that, oh, we can one day have this. Are you guys excited? Those are some research papers. There's another one here, evaluation of gaze enhanced menus, which is just the concept of Vision Pro. The thing that they talked about was the input device would be your fingers and your eyes. So the interface in this knows what I'm looking at and responds to it. So some of these visuals that we saw, when you look at that little dot, it expands into this cross, right? Similarly, when you hover over this, it probably moves, and you can imagine it's the equivalent of a hover state. But instead of your mouse, you're kind of hovering with your eyes, right? So, today, of course, Apple has committed, right? That's the way we're going to do it. But is it the best way? This research paper, I think it's from 2020. It explores the idea of gaze enhanced menus and whether they're good, bad, positives, negatives. But you can check this out. They do have a video that they've put up, which is this. They're using an HTC Vive and they have some demos, some basic demos. You can check that out. Now, the reason I actually show you research papers, some of you here, you've been designing apps for a couple of years now, apps, websites, digital product design. You might be working at some amazing startups and companies, and you might have never really read a research paper, right? And so I don't really want to make you insecure here, being like, bro, fuck, like, log research paper padh rahe hain, maine to padha hai, right? Let me make it very clear why I've included these in the first place. The reason I've included it is any new technology typically goes through these phases. It's initially research. There is a group of people, maybe academia, maybe in a company, that are paid to work on this as a project. They publish their findings. Those findings popularize this for a bigger group of people. When you have those findings, then demos are made. So the way information flows for frontier topics, right? It's on the frontier. It's not here mainstream yet. It's on the frontier. Starts with research, then it goes to demos. A lot of demos die, but some demos become products that you can use. Some demos become features in other products. Then beyond that, these products, some of them become companies, right? They become companies that officially offer it commercially, versus some don't become full companies, but an existing company makes this a feature. And that's the path that it goes. And once you have companies, then it's up to companies to really engage in the whole capitalistic cycle and take something to the mainstream, right? So the reason I talk about this is for this kind of future tech. Now, I won't say all papers are great. Some of them are very hard to read, but it's useful sometimes, right? That's all I'll say. So moving from here, now, I think you definitely roughly understand what I'm going to hear, but I'm using FigJam to show you all of this. I could have also used Google Docs. I could have used Notion. Why did I do that? Because I wanted to give you that dimension of space. Now, if I shared this link with you, you would be able to join this space and I would be able to see your cursor moving around. I'll be able to see your presence in this space and whether it's the same time or not. So if I see your cursor here, I'll be like, yeah, you're here right now in time. Or if I just see that, you saw the file, you were here at a different time, but still in the same space. Now, these two articles, this is probably the first time I heard the word spatial software and spatial interfaces. This is by this guy, Toby Shorin, who's, I think, also deep into Web3. And the provocative way this article starts, 2019, is there is no app that replicates a deck of cards, right? Now, why? Because we don't have how the number of interactions you can do with just a deck of cards. Shuffling, picking one, folding the corner, put it back, doing this, different types of shuffling, some to look cool, some to be efficient. You don't really have an app that can do that. So this talks about the idea of spatial interfaces. The idea that humans are spatial creatures. Most of our life, we kind of live in relation to space. I am here in this room right now. This is my private space. But the minute I step out, that would be the public space, right? And there are certain rules associated with whatever space you're in. It talks about the idea of spatial interfaces. It has some old cuts here, which is this video from the early days of Snapchat, where Evan, the founder is talking about this idea that on the left side, you have your chats. In the middle is where you will land every time you open the app, it's the camera. And on the right, you have stories and the other stuff, right? Now, this is also an example of spatial interfaces because they made this very specific decision that anytime somebody opens the app, they should land in the middle space, which is our camera. Why? Because Snapchat is a camera company, right? They wanted to create that habit of using photographs to communicate rather than typing. So some great examples here, including this. You know what? This is pretty much like gather.town, right? This is also spatial. How much easier would remote work be if you could also tell, looking at somebody, are they wearing headphones, which means they want to talk to me or not talk to me? You can't tell when somebody's doing that remotely. Are they all talking amongst themselves? Are they together? Is the person chilling? This, that. There are visual affordances in a real office. But this, for example, this tool, similar to gather.town, kind of creates a representation of that, right? The other thing, along with space, is the idea of presence. Now, you know that during Apple's keynote, when they walked through all of this, they placed a very high emphasis on communication experiences. So FaceTime in the office, remote work with your colleagues, with your friends, with your family. The idea here is when you're thinking about spatial interfaces, you also have to think about presence. But an example of that from Snapchat would be, when you're on the same screen, you see this little Bitmoji guy just like peeking. Right? That's a presence indicator. Similarly, in Figma, cursors are presence indicators. So when you think about space, you have to think about presence. This also ties to the idea of immersion, which is how present are you to your environment or how immersed are you in the application. So that is spatial interfaces, right? Even without AR and VR and the headset, this is still a concept that was happening in software regardless, right? Most applications now are becoming a little bit more real time. We are seeing the Figmification of a lot of software. Even something like video editing, which typically happens alone, in my, Final Cut Pro or whatever. There are now tools that are saying you can collaboratively edit video, right? And it's Figma for video. Where does that come from? It's kind of spatial software. It's kind of real-time collaborative software. And these two articles do a great job of that. Spatial software, this is part 2 of the same article. Check it out. It talks about virtual worlds and it sets forth this model of how you should imagine your interfaces, right? So we saw something similar with Apple's official interfaces that they just released, but this is from 2020. And this is basically talking about the idea that you have your interface, you have the world here where interactions are happening, I guess. Within the world, you have movement, there are bodies, there are objects. Figma is an example. This is your world, this is your interface. World, I guess you could also call it a canvas here. These are your objects on this canvas. This is your body. Right? This is your body of the user. It's just this cursor, or you can click on these things on top. Whoa, nice little presence indicator here as I move to say hi. Why do you think Figma added this? Because if I'm on the file, how do I say hi to someone? Think about that. How do I say hi to someone? I can just move my cursor, right? Beautiful little feature, presence indicator right within Figma. Nice to see that. Hello to all of you. But anyways, guys, that is spatial software. Note around this. So this, by the way, this is 2019 is when he first wrote this article. 2020 is when he wrote part 2. 2021 is when he presented at Figma Config. So this is Figma's keynote. This is 2021. So this video, I guess, is his summation of all this stuff he's been researching, right? So I love researchers like this. I think on a side note, if you folks here are really thinking about, how do I move from junior to senior, right? What are some things that I can do to start pitching myself as somebody who's senior? Create stuff like this. Create stuff like this that other people want to share, right? The only reason I'm including it here is not really to do a favor to John, but he put this together. And when I saw it, I was like, wow, why is nobody else talking about this? It was a valuable resource. And now I'm sharing it with hundreds of you because I just liked it, right? And that is personal brand in some ways. So create good stuff, create guides for other people. The final thing I have here is this is by Nielsen Norman Group. Nielsen Norman Group, fucking legends in the space, right? They're one of the OGs. Literally, when I first heard about the concept of UX, I heard it about through these guys. Right? I would read their articles and be like, wow, bro, who are these guys? Nielsen and Norman, who are you? Right? Now, of course, world leaders in research-based user experience totally believe that. They have this article, this is from 2021, which basically talks about the usability heuristics applied to VR. And the reason I included this here is to give you an example of it's not totally new. We are building upon what has already existed. And so the examples in this, right? These are some classic UX principles that you would have done even if you're designing for apps or websites, right? First example here, visibility of system status. Now, this is a simple UX principle which says that if there is something going on in the app that affects my usage in some way, show me an indicator, show me this information, show me system status rather than hiding system status, because that can lead to confusion. Match between system and the real world. Use words that are familiar, speak their language, right? I'm not going to give you detailed examples for each of these, but the point I'm trying to make here and the question that I'm trying to answer is, can somebody directly jump into becoming a spatial designer, or do they need to understand classical UI and UX for apps and websites? And the answer is, I would not suggest directly jumping in. The answer is that this anybody can get started with, but to really make use of this, which is intermediate, I would suggest very difficult unless you're already a designer, right? In fact, most of this is theoretical, but to actually be able to apply this, which is going to be the next thing, advanced, you really need to learn design, guys. Like, you're excited about this? Yeah, so are we. But who do you think is going to perform better? Somebody who's already a designer, who understands users, who understands how to build products, who understands visuals, who understands UX principles, or is it going to be somebody who's starting from scratch, right? Designers, people who are already designers, will have a huge advantage to people who become designers starting with Vision Pro. Right? So invest in classical UX, right? Understand all of this stuff. I know you might want to still do Vision Pro in the future, but you cannot escape the fact that smartphones are the primary device of the world. You have to understand how to design for smartphones. You have to understand how to design for the web. The web has mobile web. They've got desktop web. It's non-negotiable, right? So I hope that answers that question. Error prevention, right? How do you prevent errors from happening? A possible error when it comes to a headset might be me bumping into a device or breaking my TV, right? That's an extreme example. Or feeling like I'm in a roller coaster and I fall down and I hit my head. Like, that's a grave error. You want to totally avoid that, right? But there are also smaller errors. Like, you might be too close to the edge. So a little bit in advance, it tells you, right? That's all error prevention. So check these out. Recognition rather than recall, flexibility, efficiency of use, basically the idea of shortcuts and customizations, aesthetic and minimalist design, sure. Help people recover from errors. So if an error happens, don't pretend like it didn't happen, because what the fuck, bro? Acknowledge that it happened and give me a way to fix it. So a classical example here would be on my phone, let's say my internet goes away for a sec. So whatever app I'm on might say no internet available. But then it should have a button that says retry, correct? Because what if my internet comes back? Or it should automatically refresh every 5 seconds so that when it's there, it continues regular operation, right? So that is an example of recovery from errors. That's classic UX. Help and documentation, yeah, pretty straightforward. But this is what makes this such a good article is it has examples from real VR apps, right? So if you've not really used VR, very useful to see this stuff. Let's jump into advanced. This was probably one of the craziest videos I found, bro. It has like 5,000 views. But this guy, Mike Algers, literally all of these resources I got from his video. He has this VR interface design manifesto, which is also pretty cool. And some of the resources that he mentions in this are these. So you want to look into some old Oculus keynotes, right? Because this kind of gives you an idea of where the field was. You want to go a little deeper into the history, right? So check out some of these papers on head-mounted displays. Why back then in the 60s? Why did they do it back then? Like, where did the idea come from? You want to have an answer to that, right? You really want to have an answer to that. And this is where you will find it. Some old demos, right? So VR UI on Oculus Rift. I think this was a demo of the early days of user interfaces in VR. So I think this was a demo with Hydra and Kinect. I'm not exactly sure what Razer Hydra is, but check that out. This one, it was basically around 3D user interaction techniques. So like, I think the main example they took in this paper was, imagine if you had to design a grocery store. So a grocery store, something like, Swiggy Instamart, is a 2D application on the phone. But imagine if it was in 3D, which means there are real shelves and You have shelves and then you have aisles across the store. So how does that work? How can you do that in VR? That's what this paper and this demo was about, creating a shopping application in VR. Check that out. Middle VR, I think they shut down. I have no idea about them, but some video around that. Allspace VR, these are basically some existing VR apps. This nice video about VR interfaces. Some more here. Leap Motion. I know you guys probably heard of Leap Motion. The Leap Motion, from what I remember, was the first device to actually do finger and hand tracking. So the reason I think this is useful is you'll get into a lot of their demos, because even back then, there were a lot of things they knew that we can't do. But they were still making demos because they were like, eventually it's going to be possible, right? Leap Motion, I think, is still around, although I think they've pivoted to something else. But their blog, they've got stuff like this. For example, what would a truly 3D operating system look like, right? Their explorations, their design process of how they explored this problem statement. I think you'll find that interesting. How UI Kit, I think this was a GitHub repo for this. Google Glass, a lot of the Google Glass pages, Google has deleted them from the website. They're not even accessible anymore, dead links. But check out Google Glass. Check out Google Glass. Okay, next, we're getting to some more practical matters here. So this particular series is all about using type in AR and VR. This was written by Nitish Yadav. So Nitish Yadav, back then, was a designer at Headout. He was very early to AR and VR, right? Really cool guy. He now works at Meta. Mayank did an interview with him on Whiteboard where he talked about his master's experience. He did his master's abroad, talked a little bit about AR. Check that out, okay? Check that out. You might like this. Episode number 22 of Whiteboard.fm. But he wrote this guide for Google Fonts, right? This is his guide. He's written all these articles. And this is the main page. This will have all the stuff. But the individual things here are, how do you think about AR and VR, right? A basic. Then how do you think about designing for it, right? These kind of considerations. Selecting types. Do some typefaces work? Some of them don't. Why is it? Can you use any font? Can you only use some fonts, right? / typefaces. And beyond that, what types of text will you see, right? So for example, this is the equivalent of a heading. On the web, you have heading, H1, H2, paragraph, list. Similarly, in VR, you've got this, which is headings, but you might have these small labels, metric labels, progress labels. What exactly are the terms for this, right? So that's the article that he's written. And finally, there's one thing about technical challenges, which kind of talks about field of view, right? So things that are in the corner of our eyes, we can't see them that well. So don't put important information here, things like that. Check it out. Nitish also had if I remember correctly, he had a resource website where he put together a lot of resources for design in AR. Now that website, I think he shut it down, but I was able to go to Wayback Machine, the Internet Archive, find Nitish's website and find a few resources from there, right? So shout out Nitish, we want that website back, right? Bring back your AR resources website. All right. Beyond this, 2 WWDC videos that I definitely suggest you watch. Definitely, right? The first one is Designing Fluid Interfaces, WWDC 18. This is, in my opinion, one of the best WWDC. Best, bro. Like, everybody needs to watch this. Even if you're not interested in AR and VR, this is where, we've used the screenshot in one of our videos. Humans used hand tools extensively back in the day. And what they would use this for is things like breaking bones, removing marrow, right? Cutting string, shaping, chiseling. And so the hands have evolved a lot, right? Hands have evolved a lot because we've evolved to do fine-tuned activities with hand tools. So the phone is the ultimate hand tool, right? And in some ways, it's been 150,000 years in the making that we have phones. Finally, we have phones, right? From an evolutionary perspective. A note that Apple made during their keynote, when they were talking about this is a new computing device, it's a spatial computer. They were talking about the idea that desktop, the reason personal computers took off was the input methods of keyboard and mouse really enabled you to have a closer human-computer interaction, right? Mouse and keyboard. When it comes to the next computing wave, which was smartphones, the thing that enabled it was actually not touchscreen, it was multi-touch. Apple was the first to do multi-touch widely, right? So this is a beautiful, beautiful article, right? What makes an interface feel fluid? What exactly does these things mean? A tool is an extension of your mind. But when Apple talked about spatial computers, right? This is 2018, by the way. In 2023, when Apple talked about spatial computing, they said that we're going to the most natural input methods, which is hands and eyes. The eyes give away a lot. Eyes are literally a window not into your soul, but literally a window into your brain. You can kind of tell how confident, how in the zone, how present I am just by looking at my eyes. So the reason sunglasses feel cool is because technically you're hiding information, right? The other person does not know what part of the body you are looking at. Definitely watch this, guys. A beautiful keynote. It talks about how the hands have evolved and, these movements starting from keyboard, mouse, and now we have this, an extension of the natural world, extension of yourself. Interfaces that extend our mind. So clearly you know where all this is going. Check that out, okay? Check that out. That's WWDC 2018. Another nice one that you can watch, this I think is 2017, 60-second prototyping. How do you prototype? Now, I don't know how relevant exactly this will be to your VR stuff, but the reason I include it here is prototyping culture is very, very important. Very important. Throughout the cohorts, as much as possible, in fact, we should be doing it more. We pushed the idea of always use Figma Mirror. Always open it on your desktop, open it on your phone, try it out, right? Having 10 screens in front of you, that's not how people will actually use it. Similarly, prototypes, it kind of carries into motion design, right? A lot of motion design is prototype based, which is if I tap something, this happens. So this, you can make a prototype that as a designer without coding, you can actually show that. Right, so prototyping is a very important part of the design process in general. But since we are in the advanced section, how do you prototype for AR? How do you prototype for AR? This video here is a great example. Now, as this loads, the point I'll make here, why do you need to prototype for VR? It's because you and I, we both know these devices are coming only later, right? They're not going to come right now. So anything that you design, you can't test it out as such. You can, of course, look at the flat version of it on your screen, but you can't test out, for example, how close should something be to each other? How do I lay out my information architecture or whatever, right? You might have some apps that you're thinking about that would be cool for the Vision Pro, but how do they actually work? Is screens enough? Is screenshots enough? No. This is a beautiful example. This person has literally put physical objects on his shelf. He's doing a walkthrough. He's pretending like he's in VR right now. And what will happen? When I do this, this happens, right? And so that was a mock interaction. Now he's turning his head to show that videos and photos would show up here. He's literally using paper. Look what happens next. He approaches this object. He taps on this. And look, what are these people doing, right? Literally the way you prototype it is using a camera. So what they're doing is they're bringing all this thing, they're making it fly into the screen. Why? Because they're showing you what it would look like in VR. So this is how prototyping works, guys, right? I've included this link. Check it out. These deep interactions, like I'll give you an example of this, right? When you have a photo, you pinch to zoom. Now, pinch to zoom, to even validate it as a concept, you have to prototype it first, right? To see if it feels natural or not. Similarly, you have to say, with a small pinch, it should not move too much, right? So these things, you have to see it at a prototyping stage. When you're designing apps for Vision Pro and you don't have a headset, you might have to do shit like this, right? So look at this. He's doing selection. Like this is a scroll bar and this is the video. So funny, dude. That's so funny. So this is the article, Prototyping Methods for Augmented Reality. How do you do it? Check it out. Might be useful. Here, designing for Vision Pro, there is this understanding you need to have, which is it's not the first device. Obviously, we know that, right? It's not the first device. Yet, it's the first Apple device. So a lot of things you will see for the very first time as a OS level pattern, right? Vision OS will just have it within it. But if you want to go deep, you have to understand the devices that came before. And so one of them is HoloLens, right? HoloLens by Microsoft. They have this article called Touching Holograms. And basically what they do is they talk about the idea that when you have an object that comes up like this, it's pretty much a hologram, right? But what if you could interact with it like a real object? Now, of course, the Apple had said, we'll probably take something like this for granted. But it was a futuristic concept back then when this was written. With an Oculus, if you want to pick something up, you have to do this. You have to press the trigger. Really funny story. There's one time when I spent an hour in Oculus and I went, after I took the headset off, I left my room and I wanted to open the door and I reached for the handle, and instead of holding the handle like this and twisting it, I go to the handle and I do this. And then I realized, bro, I'm not in VR anymore. What the fuck? You can't just pull things with a trigger, bro. What? You don't have a controller in your hand. What the hell? In VR, that's how you do it. Whether you pick up a light object, a heavy object, a cylindrical object, a sharp object, this is the interaction, right? You press the trigger and you keep it pressed. The minute you leave it, it drops. And one interesting thing I found in this article was the idea that if you are able to create something like this, and very likely you will have something which they call emergent interactions, which means it's not really that all the interactions that are possible with this object are pre-programmed. Some interactions literally will happen for the first time because people interact with it in different ways, right? Like, for example, a vinyl disc, right? And so the way you play music is you put it into a record player, you drop the needle, and now these are interactions that you're doing with your fingers. But you can also scratch. You can do a... The idea with this is when you have these objects in the digital world, right? Whether they are holograms like this or whether they're NFTs, right? It could just be NFTs. You will be able to do stuff with them which are not just pick up and just throw it in the air. You can just do stuff based on the object it is. So that would be really dope. There's also this video here, which I'll play a little bit. But this was Microsoft Productivity Future Vision. So HoloLens, you might be wondering, how come we've never seen somebody with a HoloLens, right? I don't know a single friend who has a HoloLens. But then I think the reason is because they made it an enterprise device. It's not a consumer device. So this video, I think, was from 2020, if I remember correctly. And this was just a demo of HoloLens, what you might be able to do. So cool. You can check the rest of that out. 6-minute video. That is prototyping. And the point I made here is that Apple's device is the first one, but there have been other devices. There have been other companies, right? So this is Microsoft. You can go deep down the Microsoft rabbit hole, exploring the HoloLens. You can go down the Google rabbit hole of things like their augmented reality experiments. I think Google Labs, a few of those. You could check out Google Glass. You could check out, things like Soli and all that, which, were finger interactions and stuff. Let's talk a bit about Meta. This article titled Facebook's XR Roadmap, Mixed Reality Roadmap, Facebook Reality Labs, talks about what has Facebook done throughout that kind of builds it up to be a player in the space. Low-cost devices, right? They were losing money on their headset. Develop an ecosystem. Facebook or Meta, they've been doing so much with... In India, for example, they've been doing so much with AR filters, right? We have folks from 10K, people like Varun Raikar. He's been doing AR filters for a couple of years now, right? So all of that, you need an ecosystem of developers, right? People should be excited to build stuff on your platform. They are now trying to push this, which is VR adoption into everyday work. They started with avatars, fashion brands. They had a project with Ray-Ban. I forgot what it was called, but they did some headset like Snapchat glasses type. I'm not sure exactly what Aria was. I'm forgetting right now, but whatever, privacy controls, ads, evolution of ads. In the last stream, we talked about eye gazing as a way to do ads. Hover and you spend a little too long on a reel and it registers that as interest, right? We talked about some of this stuff. And basically, this is kind of doing a little bit of a projection. It's saying 2024, you could do brain-computer interfaces. Oh, yeah, for sure, bro, is what most people will say. But we know that it's just a matter of time, right? Sooner or later. They talked about this concept of cellatars, right? Which is you could basically digital avatars, which are digital beings, so to say. Not even avatars. An avatar requires a person on the other end to be controlling it. These are just like 3D influencers or something, right? And it's calling it cellatar. So you might have these AI agents or NPCs that act like salespeople. Now, that the AI stuff that happened recently, the current wave that we're on, is enabling a lot of this. And so the reason I included this here is because whether Meta does it or whether it's some AI company that does it or Apple itself, these are just ideas that have been around for a while. So always great to check this out. Something that I found really interesting. There is literally a 5-page email by Mark Zuckerberg in 2015. And he says we should acquire Unity. So this is an article Zuckerberg is writing to his board members, I guess, or like the very senior leadership. And he discusses in insane detail why we should buy Unity. Now, of course, we know Facebook didn't end up buying Unity, but the reason it's such a great one, bro, what a thinker, bro, what a guy. Like, I read this and I was like, dude, like, you're fucking smart, like, insane. I loved it, right? How do you even justify we should buy it, right? Where does it come from? And so he goes into insane depth here, bro. He's like, we don't own mobile, right? We don't own mobile. We've kind of missed capturing on any hardware device. Talks about the revenue share, OS versus third party. If we did Unity, what we could do, right? From 2015, dude. He talks about, as a company, what strategic advantages will we have. Anyway, you might not find this that crazy, but very good context to have. Outside that, this was a little fun one that I included, which was synthetic media. Now, some of you who've been following along, you know this concept. We've talked about it, but media is becoming synthetic. Have you guys noticed that? You might not already, but a good percentage of the stuff that you see on your Twitter feeds is not a real person writing that. It's ChatGPT, right? So the word for that is synthetic media. It's synthetic. Similarly, you will have things like Lil Miquela. She's the virtual influencer, right? Been around for way super long now, like more than 5 years, really ahead of their time. Blocko, he was another virtual influencer. He was a YouTuber virtual influencer. Hilarious as fuck, bro. The idea here is that with some of these AI tools, right? So GPT, text to image, text to video, you know what I'm talking about. Media becomes synthetic. We just take it for granted that every face that we see on the internet is probably real. It's not going to be that way next year, right? So synthetic media, although it kind of feels like a different thing, I'm including it here because you should know this. This is related. How exactly it's related? How do these avatars play out and whatever? We don't know, but that's in the future. Books to check out. Now, let me just tell you guys this. I have not read these books, right? So the recommendation, it's not directly coming from me. These book recommendations, I actually found these on Nitish's blog, right? And the fact that Nitish is a really early OG AR/VR designer working at Meta, I saw it and I was like, okay, I can take your word for it. So these are his recommendations for books. UX for XR. Of course, it's a textbook, so it goes super deep, right? All of this stuff. Check that out, bro. Now, only the folks who are very, very serious will read this, right? The rest of you guys, you can probably wait, late adopter, figure it out. But right now, I would say if you want to go depth, these might be probably the best way to do it. Right? So this second book here, more focused on AR, and these are some of the examples, or rather, these are the contents. This is what you can expect from this, right? So very technical, very, very technical. Now, as a designer, do you need to know all of this? No, man, obviously not. But you can draw the line. I'll leave this up to you. How deep you want to go? Your call. Third book, augmented reality. I guess this is not a textbook as such, it's more of a book. Not even available though. And this fourth book here, which is VR, right? These first two this one was XR, so a little bit of both. This one was pure AR and this one is pure VR. However, for some reason, this book is just not available, like fucking expensive. So I'm sure you guys can figure out if you really want to read it. But that's the VR book. So let's talk about this final part. This is what I'm still working on, but this is just some general inspiration around it, right? So of course, I'll start with my own video, right? This is by ex-Apple team. We basically talk about the Humane device, so like projection AI device that does projection as a means, right? So this is kind of one way you can kind of imagine this, but it's kind of blurring the lines at this point, between hologram, projection, headset. So definitely very interesting. Wired article about how Her's vision of the future is probably more real and likely to happen than Minority Report, which is the more dystopian version. I, of course, found a lot of movies. So examples from Spider-Man Homecoming, right? This is Nacho. You know what he does. He's into a life of crime. Right here, you can see that Spider-Man can use his AR capabilities to identify that, yes, that is indeed Nacho. What I'm going to do is I'm going to zoom into his face. I'm going to pull out his name check on a database. I don't know why. Why does Spider-Man have clearance to the NSA, CIA, and FBI? Guys, you should not be... Don't do that. Don't give that to him. How does he have access to that? This is, of course, from a movie. It's not real, but this is technically also augmented reality, right? What it's kind of doing is not just for Spider-Man, you will also see Tony Stark. Tony Stark's headset also shows stuff like this. In fact, he helped him with the stuff. But without going too deep into Marvel lore, this is a great place to look for. Like, who do you think makes these interfaces? It's real designers that do this, right? There are design studios that exclusively work on futuristic UIs, right? For movies. So check this out. I'm not sure who did this exactly, but definitely some movies you can watch. I'll add a few more here, right? So First Contact, try this out, bro, on your Oculus. Beautiful game. Beautiful game. If you ever get a friend's Oculus and you're like, what should I try? Try this, bro. First Contact, amazing game. You wake up, there's this robot. He gives you a full onboarding sequence. Now, the more you go into these movies, the more a lot of them feel like dystopian, right? So here's Ghost in the Shell. Ghost in the Shell, just quickly going to play this reel here. A lot of great examples of applied to cities, right? Of this applied to cities.
It would be a great tragedy if artificial superintelligence is never developed. You've hit your peak, and an algorithm wants your job. Now what? Do you do? Again, what?
So this is not the trailer, by the way. This is the demo reel. That's the design studio that worked on it. So check this out. Very similar to what you will find in shows like Altered Carbon, Blade Runner, the movie. Very dope. Check it out. Of course, it's dystopian, but the point is, I think you would rather watch a dystopian movie than a utopian, right? So dystopian scenarios are more interesting, and so they do better. So somehow we have a perverse incentive to create more visions of dystopia than utopia. You guys ever thought about that? But let me show you this. This, guys, I want you all to guess what year this was from. Now, don't look it up. That would be the easy way out. Guess how many years old is this? Very old, okay? But 8 years old, this video, right? This was the first time I was like, bro, AR might just be a fuck AR, bro. Like, this was before I even had a good camera on my phone. And I was like, wow, AR. This, by the way, was one of the most popular AR videos, like one of the earliest ones, right? So 3 million views. This was way before AR kind of became a thing as well, right? So hyper reality. In fact, now people will be like, oh, after Apple knew it. But anyways, guys, watch that video. Really nice. So this guy, or this studio rather, this is what they do. They kind of do this kind of stuff. Social Dilemma, I think it's a meme movie, bro. To scare people, to scare the normies, to be honest. But I like this because even regular UIs, you can't show them on the screen, right? So they've augmented reality. So there's a lot of nice depictions of augmented reality. Not to say that what they mentioned in the Social Dilemma is wrong, but it's kind of normie coded. You know what I mean? It's like mainstream media anti-tech kind of propaganda. Like I didn't like the little that I watched. I did not like it. Another movie, Sight Extended. Not watched this, but when I saw the visuals, I was like, wow, this looks actually really fucking cool. So I will probably watch this movie. But that's the scene, guys. That, folks, is my guide to spatial design for Vision OS.